All right, so the day is here. We're going to go over how to set up the Microsquirt for the J series engine. Now, if you haven't watched any of the other videos, this is a J35A4 out of a Honda Odyssey, 2000, 2002 area. And what we're going to do is go through all the settings on how to get this engine fired up for the first time. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to upgrade the firmware to the Microsquirt. And we're going to have to go download a file. And I'm going to use an older version. They've already came out with a new firmware. But for this video's sake, I'm going to download the exact one that I'm using already. So I'll show you how to get the old firmware. We're just one version behind at this point. But let's go ahead and get that done. So we want to unhook the coils, unhook the power. My fuse panel's back here for all my injectors and coils. We're going to unhook, I unhook both of them. And then on pin 15 on the Microsquirt, there is a bootload wire. And it says bootload or bootloader. What we want to do is get a very good ground to that wire. And what I did was I stripped probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches off of the end of the wire. And then the ECU cover that protected the factory ECU, I actually pulled one of the 10 millimeter bolts out, wrapped that wire around it, and screwed it back in. And you want to make sure that that thing has a very good ground. You don't want to lose connection partway through upgrading the firmware. If you do that, you can brick your Microsquirt. So just don't play around with loose connections. Make sure your battery has a good connection. And basically, whenever it starts doing its thing, just don't even touch anything. So we're going to do a key on and power up the Microsquirt. Again, this is with none of the coils plugged up. And then we're going to hook up the Microsquirt to the computer. Let's switch over. So the first thing we need to do is just go to Google, put in MS Extra firmware. And we're going to go to the msextra.com downloads. Now, the Microsquirt uses the Microsquirt 2 firmware. And you can see right here, it's the Microsquirt module. Now, I'm not using 3.4.4. They've already updated it, but I don't use it. So this may have some extra small features to it. You'd have to look it up, basically. But what we're going to do is go to the MS2 archive releases. And we're going to download the 3.4.3 version. So we're going to download it. Go ahead and agree to the terms. And then you're going to save this. And then once it downloads, we're going to drag and drop it onto the desktop. And we can right click on it and extract all. And what you're going to get is this little folder right here. All right, so the first thing we want to do is once we have downloaded the MS2 Extra release, the 3.4.3, we're going to open up that folder. We're going to go to MS2 Loader Win32. And this is going to run us through upgrading the firmware. Now, we've already pulled all the ignition coils, so we're going to kind of fly through this. Enter. We've connected to the Microsquirt. We know it has power. Ensure that no tuning software is running. So we want to make sure Tunerstudio is not running or any other tuning software that we could use with the Microsquirt system. Debug message level, we can just stick with 1. That's fine. Scan serial ports. Yes is the default. It has detected it. And this is the correct firmware file we want to use, the microsquirt.s19. Checking serial format, new serial. We do not want to preserve sensor calibrations. The only reason why I'm doing this is because I already have my sensors calibrated and it saves them. I'm going to put no because I want to start with a fresh tune. Now you can do this and that is fine too. There is one setting here that you'll see. This says jumperless reflash enabled. Now, probably before that last sensor calibration, it may ask you about the jumperless reflash enable or disable. I've already enabled it, so I've already upgraded my firmware. So on yours, it may ask you about that, and you can choose to enable it or disable it. If you enable it, if you ever upgrade your firmware again, you will not have to ground out the bootloader wire. That's what that's for. Enter. Now it's going to go through its flashing command. Now this goes pretty quick. It only takes about 2 minutes or so. So during this little short period of time, I want to go over a few things. One, if you haven't watched other videos, you need to go back and watch them. There's important information about sensors and wiring and like the timing gear tooth being cut off, etc., etc. If you've skipped over all that, this is not going to work. The second thing I want to go over is this is just a base tune to get the motor started. We'll get the idle area going pretty good. You will be able to just kind of putt around, but I do not suggest going out and just hammering on this thing. The tune is not going to be set up for that. You can cause major engine damage by doing that. So go ahead, get out there, start asking people about a dyno, and start getting a hold of the people that tune in your area. You'll most likely want somebody that has tuned with Microsquirt before. There's plenty of guys out there. If there is nobody in your area, that's fine too. If you join some Microsquirt or Microsquirt Facebook pages and just start asking around who's best tuning in your area, who does live tuning, who does remote tuning, stuff like that, you will find someone that can remote tune. So if you get your car to the dyno, they can take over your computer and over the internet, and they can tune your car for you. So, like I said, don't go out hammering on this thing. You can damage your stuff. This is just to get your car running and idling to where you can get it to the dyno. Another thing to check is whenever you're getting ready to go to the dyno, do all your pre-checks. Make sure your spark plugs are firing. Make sure your oil's good. Make sure your tires are good. Your brakes are good. Like, make sure you're not leaking fluids all over the place. You don't want to pay a guy on the dyno to fix little bitty problems that you could do at your house. Dyno time's pretty expensive. Um, I say that the dyno time's not really expensive, but once you include the dyno and the tuner and everything, it just compounds really quickly, and you just don't want to be chasing small problems on the dyno. And don't forget, while we're taking this little break, like, share, and subscribe. Share this to your buddies that might have an interest in doing something like this, and I would appreciate it. Let's go ahead and get going. So this is done. It looks like everything has been loaded and everything is good. So let's get going into Tunerstudio. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new project because you're probably not going to have any of these other projects. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give the project a name. You can name this whatever your car is. I'm just going to put Microsquirt video. Now, we can go ahead and auto detect the firmware. But to me, I would rather just do it the quicker way. For me, go to your desktop and you'll want to find that release that we used to upgrade the firmware. And we're going to go right here, Microsquirt I&I. Not the module. We want just the regular Microsquirt. Boom. That's done. We're going to make sure we have wideband selected. Fahrenheit, it's what I use. And everything else we really don't need right now. If we already connected and we already know that we've been connected to upgrade the firmware, we know that Windows is connected, so we should be able to just load this up. Now, I prefer the default dashboard. You can go through here if you have a digital dash, and you can switch to these anytime you want. But for just needing the data right away, I find the basic one to be the best. All right, so just first things first. Okay, it loaded up a base map. So sometimes it won't load up anything, and you'll just have like a bunch of weird numbers here. So I'm going to show you how to load the basic MSQ. And what we want to do is go back to the desktop, find that folder again. And what we're going to do is go to Tune Files, and then just the Microsquirt, not the module, just the Microsquirt. And what this is going to do, yes, we're going to burn it. So basically, it has loaded the factory tune for the Microsquirt. And we're going to modify this to what we want to do. So the first thing we want to go over is the engine parameters. And you can see here that this is set up for a 4-cylinder right now. What we're going to do is we're going to keep it speed density. We want to keep it 2 squirts per cycle. You can go up to 6 if you want to. You have to be divisible into your cylinders, I believe. So I like to keep it at 2 because if you think about it, you'll add more dead times if you go to more squirts. Now, you may have better idle quality if you go to 6, but you will also run out of injector time quicker because you have 6 dead time events versus just having 2. So I like to keep it at 2. It idles just fine for me. But for somebody else, it may have like a little choppier of an idle. You may have to run a little bit richer. So this is totally up to you. This will change the map a little bit, but if you want to go with this video, we're just going to go with 2. So we're going to go with 6 cylinders, 6 injectors. This is going to be 3471. That's the engine CC. You can find this on Wikipedia if you're on like a J32. I don't know the exact CCs of the J32. Injector size, mine is 980. Now mine's 980 at my fuel pressure. So this will change based on your fuel pressure. So let's say you had 200 cc injectors at 45 psi, but at 60 you may have 275 or something like that. So just double check, make sure that you have the right cc for your fuel pressure. And then we're going to go, yep, that's good, that's good, that's good, that's good. Make sure you're on cc and not cubic inch or pounds per hour unless your injectors are set up that way. And we're going to see how this changed to 4.0. This one's 4.0. And if you go over these little help bars, just hover over them, they'll kick out what they are for. Like this one is technically related to pulse width at 100% VE. So if your engine was 100% efficient, it would need that much injector per cylinder. Let's go ahead and burn this. A lot of these settings you can do outside of the car. You don't need to be connected. And we're going to go ahead and power cycle this. Some settings are going to require us to do that, and some of them aren't. So let's go ahead and get to the next one. Barometric correction. So on this, what I like to do is just set that to initial map reading, and then we're going to set a limit. So 105 kPa and then 80 for the lower. So if it gets out of this range, it might throw up an error saying, hey, your map is faulty or something's wrong. And this one should be what it, yeah. Fixed barometer reading for wind barometric. Okay. So that's what it would normally go to if you don't have anything set there. The rest of this should look good. You should do single table. You can run a dual table, but I don't. I've ran up to 27 psi and I keep it on single table. It just blends. So 16 by 16 table, you might as well use the biggest table you can get. And speed density disabled, multiply map. This is going to make our map look a little weird compared to what they used to do, but it makes you estimate farther regions that you haven't touched yet a lot easier. This will make sense in a little bit. Include AFR target. Stoic is 14.7. I run this as gas. I do run E85, but I let the flex fuel sensor do the correction. Ignition load, we're doing speed density. We're going to burn this. Without power cycle. Another thing I want to point out is that I actually put a trickle charger on my car while I'm doing this, just because I have the key on the entire time. So the rev limit, I keep this pretty low. I run mine at 6,500. If you've seen my other videos and you're like, why is he not revving that out? Well, it's because I haven't tuned above that. So I haven't got the car back on the dyno, so I like to keep mine at 6,500, keep that at 200. This is like the soft limiter where it'll hit this, kind of slow the engine down, and if it hits 6,500, it'll completely shut off everything. I do not like to do progressive retard, spark cut, limiting. I want spark cut on and fuel cut. Burn this. See, that one did not require a restart. TAC output enabled. I use this, and I want to use the TAC pen on the Microsquirt and the normal speed. This wire goes to the digital Dakota or Dakota Digital. I can't even remember which one it is. Always get them backwards, no matter which way it is. And our sensor's going all crazy down there. We don't need to do anything with barometric correction, map sample settings. The stock ones do pretty good. We shouldn't need anything else over here. So injector dead time. Now, this is one of those things that if you're running aftermarket injectors, they should have gave you a spec sheet. So my settings are not going to be the same as yours. You can run the factory settings. You can run 1 or 0.9 milliseconds. Either one will work. And back to the squirts per engine cycle, there's actually a little trick that you can actually get this running and then watch your air fuel. If you get it pretty stable to where it just holds like say 13.5, you can actually switch this over to 6. And depending on what it does, you can actually go up or down with this. The Microsquirt should automatically adjust for the injector dead time. So if you switch between 2 and 6 here, the air fuel ratio shouldn't actually change if your settings are correct. So you can play around with this, or you can just leave it alone and don't do anything with it. But you want to make sure these are kind of in the realm. Otherwise, whenever you're idling and your injector dead times are super low, or your pulse width is super low, sometimes you cannot get it to idle any leaner, or you have an issue with your air fuel at idle. Usually it's not a deal whenever you're actually driving. So we're going to go ahead and burn. Oh, I forgot the battery offset. These are what worked for mine. Okay, we're not doing any staged injection. Flex fuel, I'm going to enable this because I do have it hooked up. The stock settings are basically what I wanted. There is a little trick here that this is a basic E85 setup. So it's not as good as having a completely separate E85 map and then let the Microsquirt blend between let's say a 93 map and an E85 map. And let's say your ethanol percentage. Let's see. Here we go. Ethanol percentage. Say regular gas has 7.7 and E85 has E85, 85% ethanol. So let's say you have two completely separate VE maps, one for E85, one for regular gas. And let's say, all of a sudden you go to the pump, you fill up, it's only 60%. I think it's the Megasquirt 3, you actually have two different sets of maps or two different maps, and it will actually blend between both of those maps. Now, this is more of a basic setup. So it will just add this percent to your map and it will add this many degrees if you're at E100. So a good thing to do whenever you're setting this up, if you're going to go to the dyno, I would just go ahead and tune on E85 if you're going to put this sensor in, or if you ever plan on going E85, put this sensor in. What I like to do is go up on this a little bit, and what this does is if I tune on E85 and I get everything set up the way it is, whenever I go and I have to put regular gas in it for some reason, say there's no stations around, if I have this set at, say, 7 degrees, then whenever I go back to gas, which this is the gas column, the E100, so E85, you're kind of just a little bit off of this. Say it'll add like 5 degrees if this is at 7. It's not exact, it's just a representation. But say whenever I go back to regular gas, it will pull 7 degrees out. Now, you also need to make note of your baseline ethanol too. So if you're going to go to the dyno and tune on E85, you need to read this percentage and set this accordingly, your base ethanol percent. Now, mine's at 7 because I actually tuned on 93 first, and I'm going to leave this alone. But that is a neat little trick that you can do. And that way, whenever you have to put regular gas in it, when you don't have a gas station around, you'll run quite a bit safer timing. All right, so it's power cycle. And we're going to go to EGO control. We're going to go to single wideband. That's what I have. It's local. I'm going to set this at 700 RPM because I want it to be able to make changes. And then 160 degrees. Burn. So that's a good thing to note because while we're warming up, it probably won't do any corrections to the VE table. FR table. So this table's okay. This is the factory table that came with it. I do want to point something out. This only goes up to 100 kPa. So if you're on a boosted engine, we're going to need to modify these cells and basically give a new gradient, I guess. And then the same thing with the RPM. So I'm not going to change this just because I'm not going to run this map. I'll do like a startup, but I'm not actually going to go out and drive it or anything. I do know from experience, though, my engine likes to idle around 20. And then I'm going to do 30. I'm just going to modify these two. And then I know mine likes to idle around 13.5. I'm going to go ahead and change that. I'll change these to like 14.5. And then I'm going to go ahead and blend these. I'm going to blend them side to side. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and smooth this out a little bit. There we go. And these just change colors based on the highest number and the lowest number. So this is fine. And another thing to point out too is that just because the VE map's next, we want to make sure that our KPA and our RPM are the same between these two maps, or really, really close. But you definitely want to make sure your minimum and maximum are the same. And then your in between cells, like this one might have a few more cells for your RPMs. So you're going to have to skip a few numbers here, but just make sure these numbers land on the same numbers. That makes this job a lot easier. And the same goes with the KPA. You may have to skip a number here or there, but just make sure the numbers actually land on some of these numbers. It'll blend accordingly in between. Let's power cycle. All right, so the next setting is going to be our ignition options. And this is going to be partly why we wanted to unhook the coils, is because if these settings are off, you can fry your coils. So what we want to do here, this is fine. We want to go to rising edge, going high. We want wasted spark, ignition 1. Now I'm on a 12 tooth. I know some people were talking about doing the 24 tooth -1. That's fine. You can do that. This angle is probably going to be a little bit different for you. For me, this landed on 78 degrees. And this, we are going to double check. So whenever we do the first startup and we kind of get things stable to where it'll idle good, we can go to fixed timing, set this at 10 degrees, and we can check the timing on the harmonic balancer. Now, the J series is 10 degrees. I know some of the D's, B's, stuff like that, they were 16 degrees, if I remember correctly. These are 10. I've verified that. And then once we have that, if we don't have it, we can adjust it here. And you can actually rev this up, say 1500 RPM. It's going to lock that at 10 degrees. No matter what the RPM is, it's going to be 10 degrees. So we can adjust this angle until we get that locked in. And then we can go back to use table. Now, under cranking, we need slightly higher dwell times. So we're going to go to 4.0. It's lower than the stock one, but it's higher than what we're going to run normal. Cranking advanced, this is something you may have to play around with. My engine likes about 6.5 degrees. And kind of remember this number here, because whenever we get to the ignition map, I'll show you what we're going to do with that. So we're not running Toyota Dwell's standard. We're going to run 2.4 on this. And 1 millisecond spark duration. And that should be good. Power cycle. Gonna do dwell battery correction. And 500, 600, 48. These look to be what I ran before, so these probably worked just fine. I'm going to go to cold advance. Now, while your engine's cold, it requires a little more timing, and they have this weird curve from the factory tune, and I like to blend these out a little bit. So after 160, it's going to be 0. There we go. I like to do that. So you'll notice that after 160 degrees of coolant temp, it doesn't add any more timing. And you'll kind of see why they do that here in a little bit. All right, map-based timing retard. This is more for boosted engines. Not to say that you can't run it in A. I like to run this a little aggressive. So I start off at 100-degree intake temperature, and then I blend this, and then I start pulling timing out basically after 100 degrees. So I'll blend this to 260. So basically, as soon as it hits 100, if it goes to 100.1, it starts pulling timing a little bit. Now, it's very gradual up to the 132 intake temps. It'll be gradually going up to 1.6. But this kind of keeps you on the safe side. I run E85, and I know a lot of people don't pull any time until after 150 degrees, but that's just the way that I'm doing it. That way, it's kind of safe getting it to the dyno, and they can set it how they want it. Burn that. Knock sensor. Now, this was a question a few people have asked, and that is, hey, can you run a knock sensor? And I've always said no, but that's not really true. It doesn't do it from the factory. So you can't just plug in a knock sensor to the Microsquirt and expect it to work. It won't work. But there are add-on boxes that you can do, kind of like the KNE GT and stuff like that. They have, I think Plex makes one, and NockSense makes one, and I think Duino Speedy Knock, I think is what it's called. They're trying to come up with that. But anyways, you could get one of these boxes and then use a input. So say the spare ADC 2 wire, and you can actually have knock control then. But I don't run this. I have needed it a couple times. I've actually blown up a motor or two because I ran too aggressive timing. Now I just venture off to the safe side. So we're going to leave that disabled since we changed the settings. So ignition table. Now this map is more for a V8 or something similar to that. We are not going to run this much timing. Now, like I said before, we want to make sure our KPA matches our VE table, our fuel VE table, and the same thing with our RPMs. Because if you go off of this map, it's basically going to blend just the two closest cells where it's at. So say we're at 105 KPA, which is above the map, and we're at 5,500 RPM. So we're basically right up here. It's going to blend between 36 and 36. So we're actually just going to run 36 degrees timing there. We don't want that. Now, if you remember earlier, I said we are going to run 6.5 degrees of timing. And at idle, I know that this motor likes to idle at about 10 degrees. And then basically above 3,500 RPM, we are going to run about 16 degrees of timing. Now we can blend this to 6.5, go into the left and right blend. And then this timing's pretty fine down here. It'll work. So what we're going to do is select all of it, go down to where our 10 is, and then we're going to do a blend up and down. And then here, where we didn't get a good blend here, we're going to do the left and right blend. So let's go ahead and do that again. And then right here, we're going to set these all to 10 again. So that'll make the map look pretty good. All right, we're going to burn that. And like I said before, make sure you're covering all your RPMs. Make sure you're covering all your KPA load. And another thing to point is at 100 kPa, that's the timing that we can run. If you're in say like I got a 4-bar map sensor, so I'd be at 400. I'm not going to run 16 degrees of timing. So it'll probably be like closer to, I don't know, 0, -10, something like that. It'd be something crazy. All right, cranking settings. Now this is going to be the settings that the motor uses while it's under this RPM. So we're going to go to 500 RPM. And you'll see right here, flood clear TPS. So if for some reason we can't get this to start, I may, if I start to think that we're actually dumping too much fuel in, because whenever your map is not um, tuned correctly, especially on first startups and stuff like that, it's hard to tell whether you're actually running way too rich or way too lean, because the O2 sensor doesn't really work that well if you're at, 6 to 1 air fuel ratio or something crazy. If you go crazy, uh, it just won't read right. But if you go crazy lean, it won't read right either. So if we can't get it to start just by priming it, I may try to flood clear it and just hold the gas pedal to the floor and while it's turning over. And if it fires and starts to run, I'll know that we're running way too rich. So I'll be able to take out fuel. Now if it won't start up and I try to do the flood clear and it still won't start up, that's probably pointing me in the direction that we don't have enough fuel for our cranking pulse. All the other settings are pretty good. Priming pulse. Now, this is one of them that I like to blend these still. But we're just going to see where this one lands. This is kind of one of them deals where you almost have to hand do it. But I do like to do it at the extreme. So I like to do it after everything's already warmed up. I'll do a couple starts and just make sure this is good. And then whenever I get cold days, like in this garage, you can tell it's 70 degrees. Um, so I could do a cold start today and I could probably modify this prime number to make it start up good. So we're going to leave this alone. Cranking pulse. Again, we're going to blend this. And I kind of want that set at 100, not 101. And then I like to blend these two. Burn. So we'll go to after start enrichment. And we're going to use their settings. Typical range after start, 50% cold, 5% warm. So let's go ahead and do that. Blend this, and we will blend this. Burn. The taper you'll have to play around with a little bit. Different engines like different things. So this specifies engine cycles or seconds, and you'll notice that if our fuel map is really lean to start with, and let's say the engine just won't idle, it may idle for a few seconds. It may idle just long enough that this after start enrichment is giving it enough fuel to idle, and then as soon as this time ends, it just dies. If that happens, then I'll know that we need to add fuel to the fuel map. And these may need to be modified later, but these will help give a good indication how our fuel map is whenever we very first start. Because this adds in quite a bit of fuel. And yeah. Idle control. I'm not going to go over the idle control too much. I run a GM idle control, and basically I would have to rewire my entire setup to go back to the PWM. So I'm actually just going to kind of hold the throttle open a little bit on the first start until it warms up. Once it warms up, you shouldn't need the idle valve anyways. So but the stock Honda one is a PWM 3-wire valve, and you will have to run a test. I like to test this with it off of the throttle body, and I actually like to look in there and watch it open and close. And I can tell you from experience that I had to run 279 hertz. Now, I think it would run on any of these other ones. I think this was just faster. But I'd say if all your settings are correct, you could go down to a lower hertz. And while I'm here, I'd like to point out that you can test this by going in here, and you can do the duty cycle by enabling this test. And this is what I like to do. I like to get it out where I can see it. I'll run the test, and I'll slowly open or close the valve, and I'll write down what duty percent it is at closed and what duty percent it is all the way open. And then what I'll do, turn this off. Oh, I guess I need to turn it back on. What I'll do is go to the warm up, and at cold, I will take that PWM setting, and all the way cold, I'll have it all the way open right here, and then all the way closed at 160 or 180, because we shouldn't have to have that open at all once we get warmed up. I'm going to turn that back off because my idle air control valve is different, and it will start messing with it. We don't need these other two. These are kind of advanced settings. The air conditioning setup, I don't have that, so I can't even run it anyways. Idle advanced, you can set this up if you want to. I don't use it, so let's go to the TPS enrichment. So there's two different ways to do this. You can go off a map-based TPS or acceleration enrichment, and you can actually blend between these two. So I like to run just the TPS base. This makes it act like a accelerator pump on a carburetor. You can click on these, and this just does it off the map signal. So how much boost you're running or vacuum or anything like that, and you can base it off of that. I prefer to do it this way. Now, this is the TPS dot. This is heavily going to depend on your throttle body setup. So bigger throttle body, you're going to need more pulse width, especially at lower RPM stuff. I have my settings, and you can see this TPS dot is at 210. That means that I have to do like a really quick jab of the throttle for it to activate. I like to lower this down. I like to get this down. I think mine's set at 25, and then I kind of it blends. So like if it hits 100, it'll go up to 100, and it'll hit this line and say, I need to run 2 milliseconds of added injector time. So I want this set low, but not so low that it's activating whenever I'm driving down the road hitting potholes, because we have horrible roads out here. So I don't want this too sensitive to where it's just basically just dumping fuel in every bump I hit. But I want it low enough that if I do like a quick jab, I don't have a hesitation, and the engine basically falls on its face before it takes back off. So 25 seems to work pretty good for me. Now, let me see. My injector milliseconds was a little bit different because my injectors are pretty big. There we go. And I believe all this other stuff is good. Now you can modify the Excel time, how many seconds this is activated for, basically until the airflow catches up and everything else in the Microsquirt catches up to where it's adding fuel in. But we're going to leave all that fine. Boost control settings. So we're going to come over here to overboost protection, and we're going to do fuel and cut, or fuel and spark cut. And we're going to go to, let's say, 111 with a 10 on the Mysterious. Okay. And you're probably wondering, well, what's the point of that? Well, basically, if you're boosted, it's going to cut both fuel and spark before you get into boost. Once you're on the dyno, he'll turn this off, or actually, it's not even best if he turns off. He should go up in his KPA based on the amount of boost you want to make. If you watch people on YouTube that overboost by quite a bit, this is a safety. You want to run this. I've had wastegates fail. I've had wastegates not flow enough, and causes me to say I'm running 15 pounds. Well, now all of a sudden I'm running 22 because the wastegate won't flow enough and get enough exhaust pressure out. So this is a safety feature that you need to run. So we're going to set it to where basically we won't be able to build any boost. If we do, it'll just cut everything off. Launch control, you can set this up as your two-step and stuff like that. You will have to make sure that you don't use the flex wire since we're using that. If you have two things using the same wire, it will throw up an error code and it will not let you do anything until you fix it. And I will tell you from experience that the J series do not like two-step. The rods do not handle it very well, especially if you get really aggressive with it. So I'm going to leave that turned off. This has nitrous control too. I'm not going to get into this. I don't run nitrous on this car, so I haven't fiddled around with all the settings, but it is here if you are wanting to run nitrous. Also has sequential shift cut and stuff like that. So the ALED, we're going to enable this. And basically this is our VTEC and our power on value, so our key on for the Microsquirt, the initial value for the ALED is to be off. And then whenever it's active, we want it on. Now, what determines whether it's active or not? Well, we're going to set this to the map, and we're going to want it above, say, 70 kPa. And we'll do like a 10. This is so if you don't hit like 69, 70. 69, 70, basically the VTEC will be kicking in and out while you're just cruising. And we're going to do an and condition. So we can do this to where we do RPM. And we want to be above 3,700 RPM. Let's set this to 50. Now, I set mine to 37 because I'm basically in boost at that point. So I just go ahead and let the VTEC crack open. Again, this is so that, if you're cruising at 37 and you jump from 37 to 3,699 RPM, it's not sitting there just fluctuating, kicking that relay on and off. We're going to go ahead and unlock calibrations. I'm going to burn that. And we're going to go ahead and calibrate the TPS. So the TPS is fully closed right now. This is going to be different for everybody's setup, especially being that I run a GM's throttle. And you can see here, I'm only going up to about 82%. Get current. and I'm only closing at 4.3. I accept that. Now I'm at 0, and now I'm at 100. Now, a good thing to do is to actually do this on the throttle body, and then that way you can tell if your pedal assembly has an issue, because I've had that happen. All right, next thing. The map sensor. Now, this is going to be a little bit different for everybody, especially me. So I run a 4-bar. My settings are 0.0 and 435.5. Now, I will tell you that you're not going to be able to copy these settings even if you have a 4-bar sensor. They may work, but they're going to be off. And the only reason why I mention that is because there's like a variance in between map sensors, and it's kind of I don't know, I guess a rule of thumb that you can have like 5% difference. And 5% on 4-bar sensors, a lot. The EF and the Del Sol have two completely different settings, and both of them have 4-bar map sensors. So there is a way to check this. The bar sensor, I'm not too worried about, but for some reason I have some settings in there. Being that I used the initial map reading, I don't know why I had these in there. And not sure what that was about either. Not sure why mine had these settings in there. But we're going to burn that. And you can tell right here, I'm at 102.2 kPa. You should be right at 100. If you're at 97, that's fine. It's not going to hurt anything. 98. You don't want this at 50. You want to be as close to 100 as you can get. And then whenever we're idling, we should be in the 20 to 30 area. It may not be that at first, but totally warmed up and everything, and it's idling fine, it should be in the 20s for sure. We can double check the map sensor. You may be able to find your specific map sensor settings. I had a really hard time finding mine. So what I ended up doing was just playing around with it, and I got a running car and ran a vacuum line off of it, hooked it up to my map sensor, and then I had a gauge hooked up to where I could read how many inches of vacuum it was, and then I converted it over to kPa and basically played with the settings until I got it to read correctly. So the next thing we want to set up is the coolant temperature sensor. This one I run the stock Honda one on, and basically I did the same thing as the map sensor. I couldn't find the exact settings to use, so I used a thermometer and basically put it in my radiator setup, and as it warmed up, I ran a thermometer right next to the sensor, and these are the settings I ended up coming up with that were reading correctly. 195, and we're going to write this. Now, if you're running the factory Honda air temperature sensor, those coolant settings will probably work for the air temperature settings. I believe that's what I used. On the air temperature for mine, though, I'm going to switch over to Fahrenheit, and the bias resistor was the same. I'm going to run 48 to 7,000. I got these values from Amazon. Whenever I bought the sensor, it actually knew that I was going to need the settings, apparently. Six and 560. And we're going to write that. All right, and the last thing we want to do is do the AFR table. This is where we're actually going to pick what air fuel ratio gauge we're running. So I'm running the Innovative LC2 default. I'm going to write that. And it is showing dead lean. All right, so at this time, I believe we are ready for a first startup.